Welcome back everyone. Today we will talk about dynamic range. It's a very cool and important concept in the field of robotics and computer vision, and it's one of those things you really would have experienced every single day, and I'll give you a couple of examples later on as we go along. So dynamic range is basically defined as the ratio of the brightest part in the scene. In this case, it's the Milky Way galaxy, and the darkest part of the scene, which is the shadows on the bottom left of the screen here. So you can think of this as if you have a display, this is like the equivalent of the contrast ratio you would have seen on a monitor, which is the brightest bright and the darkest dark. And I want you to take a second and ponder upon which kind of scenarios you would have seen wherein you see a really bright part in the image and a really dark part in the image. If you were thinking about driving into the sun, you would be exactly correct. That's one of the finest examples of this scenario, wherein if we focus on the sun, we definitely cannot see the road. It's too dark, right? If we focus on the road, we cannot see the sun because the sun is too bright. So what we do is we put the sunshade down, we block off the sun so that we can actually see the road and drive safely. Here is another example in Colorado, wherein like driving into the sun is really harsh, and this can lead to a lot of accidents. And whenever we are designing computer vision systems or like robotic systems, we really have to pay careful consideration into how dynamic range affects our image acquisition process. If something is too bright in the scene, you will lose out details in that part of the scene, and it will be pure white or like the maximum value possible, and this is called blowing out the highlights. If something is really dark, you'll basically say that you're crushing the shadows and you're crushing it to the black region, and it'll appear as like zero values because it's too dark for the camera to be able to perceive any amount of light there, right? And this is not really a great thing because the brightest bright and the darkest dark are very hard to like actually image if you're trying to image both at the same time. Today's modern day cameras do something really cool, as we will come to in a few seconds. But with just a normal simple camera, like just pointing it into a bright part and the dark part, is actually really hard for us to be able to get this scenario. Let's look at this into more of a practical perspective. Here the intensity of light is in lumens. It's going from like 10 power minus 6 to 10 power 6, and our range of our eyes is pretty spectacular. It can see like a very dark region like 10 power minus 5, can see up to a very bright region like 10 power 5. This is like a saying like, hey, like when we look at the sunset, we can actually almost see the sun, and we can also see the mountain in front of the sun, right? You might not be able to make perfect details in both the scenarios, but you can still make out that there is a mountain range, that there is a sun there, and you can make out a lot of details which our modern day cameras are yet to process and come to that level, right? This is our range of the eyes. Our common real world scenes are generally much lesser in dynamic range. Again, the example of driving into the sunset was an extreme scenario, but if you just like, hey, look out of your window, you're probably going to see everything very well, right? Our eyes are tuned so perfectly that we can see the darker parts, we can see the brighter parts, and we can like clearly decipher. If you go out and take a picture, it's generally not the same. The picture is either underexposed. We call this the low dynamic range image. This is like a common image when you have underexposed this, which means that the brighter parts look good, but the darker parts are really dark. Or you can have the exact opposite scenario depending on where you hit that focus button, because it will focus and take the intensity of that. If you focus on the darker parts, it will overexpose the sun, so you cannot see the sky. There's no detail in the sky, but the road and the front yard and all that stuff looks good in the scene, right? And this is called an overexposed low dynamic range image. When you take these images with a camera, they can be something like 14 bits of information or like 12 bits of information. When you actually put it on a display like the monitor or the phone you're watching this video on, it's actually even lesser. The display has even lesser dynamic range, or what is called as the contrast ratio, which does not show the full capabilities of what your camera actually is capturing, right? Again, there are modern day displays with like a lot of contrast ratio, like the OLED panels are amazing at this. But in general, our eyes see very well. The cameras see much less than that, and the displays show actually much less than that. Awesome. If I put all of this together, you will see that the range is pretty vast, right? Like our eyes are very amazingly built, but these common world scenes are much lesser than that, and the displays and the common images captured are much worse than that. So like I was saying, I alluded to before, so your smartphones actually fake this by capturing something called a high dynamic range or HDR image. You might have seen HDR or HDR plus like options on your smartphone. The idea is that it takes multiple photos. It takes one photo which is like for the bright part, it takes one photo which is for the darker part, and it takes a lot of the photos in the middle, which is increasing in exposure. Like we talked about last time, you either increase the ISO, or you increase the shutter time, or you increase the aperture. You do any of these things, you basically get more light at that specific region. And remember that in the image where you're exposing for the highlights, the shadows are completely black. There is no data there, right? And on the other end, if you expose for the darkest part of the image, which means the bright image is going to be ultra bright, that means that nothing in the brighter part of the image is going to be visible. It's all pure white, right? So because you know how much the exposure was and which part it actually is important, you can take this and you can write a simple computational algorithm which will let you blend these things. In one of the later videos, we will actually study the high dynamic range or HDR algorithm, how we can do this in a classical manner and how we can do this with a deep learning network. But just keep in mind that you, in this particular example, you have 6 images with different exposure values, and you can combine all of them to get the image on the left, which looks similar and natural to how we would see it as an actual image in the bird. Right? So with this tutorial, you should be able to say what is dynamic range, why we care about dynamic range, and what is HDR. Thank you. See you next time. Bye.